Imagine a super cool place with a road lined with trees, a waterway wrapping around a wide stone path, and a big lawn of grass. This awesome spot was Lindarth, a place that felt like home to me. I guess I had dozed off for a second, which was weird, because I never sleep. I coughed to cover up my embarrassment, and turned to the person standing in front of me. Welcome to my store. I stuttered, trying to sound friendly and awake. Got a specific weapon in mind? The seller asked with a curious smile. The guy nodded, looking a bit nervous. Yeah. He didn't seem like much of a threat at first glance. He might have been only a little older than me. His style was pretty cool, though, all black everything. Black hair, black shirt, black pants and black boots. And on his back he had a single sword strapped on, ready for action. I had some pretty powerful weapons for sale, but they required a lot of skill to use them properly. I wasn't sure if this guy was strong enough to handle them, but I decided to show him anyway. Hey, my one-handed swords are over here, I said, pointing to a case filled with all sorts of cool blades. But before I could even finish showing him, he got a weird look on his face and interrupted me. Actually, I'm thinking of something custom made, he said with an awkward smile. Now I was getting really nervous. What if he wanted something that was way too powerful for him to handle? Imagine creating a one-of-a-kind weapon with super cool materials. It sounds awesome, right? But here's the thing. It comes with a massive price tag. We're talking over $100,000. I hated seeing people's faces turn bright red or pale when they found out how much their custom order would cost. So I tried to warn this guy before things got awkward. Listen, metals are really expensive right now, I said, trying to prepare him for the bad news. But then he surprised me with his response. Don't worry about the budget. I want the most epic sword ever made. I stared at him in shock, my mouth hanging open. But then I found my voice again. Okay, fine. But you have to tell me what you're looking for, I said, trying to sound calm. What kind of powers do you want this sword to have? My tone was a bit sharper than before, but he just shrugged it off. Good point, he said with a grin. Okay, how about this? He said, pulling off his sword harness and handing it to me. Want something just as cool? The sword didn't look super fancy at first. It had a plain black leather handle and a matching black scabbard. But as soon as I grabbed it, I was surprised. The sword was really heavy. I almost dropped it.
Whoa, this sword was massive. I mean, you'd have to be super strong to even think about swinging it. As a blacksmith who's used to wielding a heavy mace, I've built up some serious muscle over time. But even I knew I couldn't handle this beast of a sword. I carefully pulled it out of its scabbard, and was shocked by what I saw. The blade was thick and chunky, almost like a big piece of raw meat, and it was a dark gray color that was almost black. I picked up the sword and couldn't help but feel impressed. It looked super cool. I tapped the blade gently with my finger and a menu popped up. The screen said, long sword, one-handed and name elucidator. But when I looked for the name of the person who made it, there was nothing. That meant this sword wasn't created by another player. In the virtual world of Aincrad, swords come in two main types. Some are made by players who have learned the skill of blacksmithing. These player-made swords are crafted by other gamers like me. But this sword, the elucidator, was different. I wondered, who could have created such an awesome weapon? Then there are monster drops, super cool weapons that you can get when you're out on an adventure. To be honest, us smiths aren't too impressed with these dropped weapons. We even call them off-brand or generic sometimes. But this one was different. It was really rare, even among the best loot you can find. Usually the weapons that players make themselves are way better than the ones that monsters drop. But every now and then you might stumble upon an amazing sword that's just as good, or even better. I'd heard stories about these legendary blades but never thought I'd see one up close. Now I was totally stoked and ready to give it my all. The competition was on. Imagine being a top-notch swordmaker, and some random treasure finds a way to outshine your best work. No way, not on my watch. I handed the heavy sword back to the guy, and then I reached for my pride and joy, a sleek long sword hanging on the back wall. I had forged it just 2 weeks ago, and it was hands down my best creation yet. My sword was glowing with a cool red light, like it had a tiny fire burning inside. This is my best work yet, I said proudly. I think it can hold its own against yours. The guy took my sword and waved it around,
then tilted his head to the side, looking puzzled. It feels a bit lightweight, he said. I explained, that's because I used a special metal that's meant for speed. He hummed thoughtfully, and swung my sword a few more times, clearly not sure what to make of it. Then he looked me straight in the eye and asked, "Can I put it to the test?" I hesitated, unsure what he meant. "You mean test its strength?" I asked. He nodded and pulled out his own sword, laying it flat on the counter beside us. It was clear that he wanted to see how my sword would hold up against his. I wondered what kind of test he had in mind. He stood over me, my shiny red sword glowing brightly. Then, he started to lift it up. I freaked out when I realized what he was gonna do.
"Wait, don't!" I shouted.
"If you do that, your sword will break in half." He just smiled and said, "So what if it does? That'll just prove my point. That my sword is better." I tried to argue, but he cut me off. His eyes sparkled with a fierce light, as he held my blade up high, ready to strike. The red sword started glowing with a cool blue light. "Saya!" someone shouted. Then, in a flash, the sword came crashing down. It happened so fast that I barely had time to blink. The two swords clashed, making the whole shop shake. The light from the impact was super intense, forcing me to squint and take a step back. When the dust settled, I saw that one of the blades had split in half and exploded into tiny pieces. But here's the crazy part. It wasn't his sword that got destroyed. My amazing creation. "Up, Alayeg!" I yelled and jumped onto his arm, grabbing the bottom part of the sword, and pulling it away from him. I frantically searched for the broken pieces. But it was too late. There was no way to fix it. I felt hopeless and slumped my shoulders. Then the weird thing happened. The half-sword in my hand turned into tiny triangles, and disappeared. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to calm down, then I looked up at him, furious. "What the heck was that?" I shouted, grabbing his shirt collar. "You can't just break people's things like that." He pulled his face away, looking super scared. Sorry, I didn't mean to break the sword," I cut him off, still angry. "So you're saying my sword was even weaker than you thought?" He looked confused and said, "Huh? Okay, fine. Yes," I said finally. My friend's eyes widened in surprise. "Ha! You're admitting it. That takes a lot of guts." I stood up straight, my hands on my hips, and leaned in. "But let me tell you, if I had the right stuff, I could make a sword that would totally destroy yours. It would be like crushing a tiny twig." My friend just grinned at me, clearly amused by my bold claim. "I've made up my mind," he said, his eyes fixed on the black sword. "I want that one. It's so powerful, it could break my current sword in two." He picked up the sword and slid it into its sheath. My heart started racing as I felt a surge of excitement, mixed with a little fear. "If we're really going to do this," I said, trying to sound calm, "I want to be part of every step. Let's start by finding the metals we need." My brain was telling me to slow down, but it was too late. He looked at me with surprise and curiosity, his eyebrows shooting up. "You know, I don't mind having you along," he said with a hint of a smile. "But why can't I just do it myself?" I said, getting frustrated. "I don't want anyone to hold me back." My friend just laughed and teased me, which made me even more upset. I threw my arms up in the air and stomped my feet like a little kid having a meltdown. "Don't embarrass me," I shouted. "I'm really good at making weapons." "You know," the guy just whistled and smiled, clearly thinking this was all pretty funny. "Hey, if that's how it's gonna be, then I want to see a pro in action," I said with a grin. "Let's start with the last sword you made. I'll pay you for it." The sword maker's face turned red with anger. "I don't need your pity," he exclaimed. "Just wait until I make a sword that's better than yours. You'll be paying big time for it." I chuckled and said, "I'm looking forward to it. My name is Kirito, by the way. Nice to meet you, at least until you finish making this amazing sword." I crossed my arms and looked away, trying to seem cool. The sword maker just nodded and said, "Likewise, Kirito." Then he asked, "Really? Hey, no misters for me?" "Okay, Lisbeth," someone said. But then a frustrated arg filled the air. "This was not how you wanted to start a new adventure team." Just 10 days ago, news of a weird metal had spread like wildfire among the blacksmiths in Seoul. Everyone's big dream was to reach the top floor of Aincrad. It was the ultimate challenge. But there were tons of other cool quests to try, from small to super big. Imagine being in a virtual world where characters need your help with all sorts of tasks. They might ask you to run errands, be their bodyguard, or find special items. The good news is that you'll get rewards for helping them out. However, these rewards are just okay, not super amazing. And here's the catch. Once you finish a task, you have to wait a while before you can do it again. Some tasks are even more exclusive. Only one person can complete them, and then they're gone forever. It's like finding a rare treasure. Everyone is on the lookout for these special quests. Recently, someone spotted one of these unique quests in a tiny village on the 55th floor. This village is so hidden away that not many people know about it. Imagine an old chief with a long white beard telling you about a legendary creature. A huge white dragon that lived deep in the western mountains. This dragon had a pretty weird diet. It ate crystals. And get this, those crystals turned into a super valuable metal inside its stomach. It was like a treasure factory. Lots of brave players thought, jackpot. We can use that metal to make awesome weapons. So they formed a big team and set out to defeat the dragon in its mountain home. And guess what? They won. The dragon didn't stand a chance. But here's the weird part. Even though they defeated the dragon, nothing cool happened. No treasure, no special powers. Just nothing. It was pretty confusing. The big bad beast didn't give us much of a reward. Just a handful of coins and some pretty lame loot. It wasn't even enough to cover the cost of the potions and healing crystals we used during the fight. So, we thought maybe the special metal would drop randomly. That's why lots of groups went to talk to the elder and start the quest to defeat the dragon, hoping they'd get lucky and find what they were looking for. It happened again, nothing. For a whole week, players killed tons of white dragons, but nobody got the super rare prize they were all hoping for. It was like it didn't even exist. People started to think that there must be some secret rule or trick that nobody had figured out yet. Just then, a guy named Kurito sat back in his chair sipping the tea I had made for him, even though I didn't really want to. He nodded and said, "Yeah, I've heard that story before. Hey, have you heard about this amazing material that's supposed to be perfect for crafting? The problem is, nobody can seem to find it. Lots of people have tried, but it's like it's playing hide and seek. So what makes you think we'll be the lucky ones who can actually get our hands on it? Some people think that this super special material only shows up if there's a really skilled blacksmith, called a master smith, in the group. It's like it's waiting for someone with the right skills to come along and find it. Most blacksmiths don't bother getting good at fighting." Someone said. I thought about this for a moment. You know what? That might not be a bad idea. We should get moving. But then I just stood there with my mouth hanging open. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? You think we can just waltz in and expect to survive? We're not going on some easy goblin hunt. We'll need a whole team of people to help us. The other person shrugged. But what if we actually find the stuff we're looking for, and then have to draw straws to see who gets to keep it? Which floor is that dragon on again? It's on the 55th floor. Kurito thought for a moment. I've got this, you can stay back where it's safe. His friend raised an eyebrow. You're either super brave or totally crazy. But okay, let's do this. It'll be entertaining to watch you struggle and teleport away with your tail between your legs. Kurito just chuckled and finished his tea. He put the cup down on the workbench and said, I'm ready when you are. Let's go. Hey, call me Liz. Okay, I said with a grin. So about this Dragon's Mountain, I've heard it's not as huge as everyone makes it out to be. We can hike up and back in just one day. Give me a minute to get ready. I threw open my window and started getting dressed for our adventure. I put on some simple armor over my apron dress, feeling excited and a little bit brave. I was all set for our adventure. My trusty mace was safely stored in my item screen, and I had plenty of crystals and potions to keep me going. As soon as I gave Kurito a thumbs up, he stood up and we were ready to roll. We slipped out of the store, lucky that no customers were waiting outside. I flipped the sign on the door to say closed, and we stepped into the bright sunlight. The outer walls of Aincrad were still shining brightly, casting a warm glow over everything. We had plenty of time before nightfall, so I wasn't too worried. I was pretty sure our mission to get some precious metal was going to be a bust, but at least I'd be back home before it got too late. Or so I thought. As we left the shop and headed to the teleport square, I started to feel a little nervous. What had I just gotten myself into? I glanced over at the guy walking beside me, who was dressed all in black. He seemed really relaxed. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something weird was going on. I never thought I'd say yes to hanging out with him. He annoyed me with his big talk and over-the-top confidence. And let's not forget, he totally destroyed my favorite creation. But here I was, walking beside him like we were friends or something. It got even crazier. I agreed to join his team and go on a quest with him to a whole new level. As for life in this virtual world of Aincrad, it felt like I was taking a huge risk. Wait. Nope. Don't think about that right now. Something weird was happening. I usually got along with some of the guys on my team, but I never hung out with them one-on-one. I didn't want things to get awkward or confusing. My rule was simple: if I was going to get close to someone, it had to be someone special, someone I really cared about. But here I was, walking alongside a guy I barely knew. It was totally out of my comfort zone. Have you ever felt like things were getting out of control? That's how I was feeling until Kirito spotted a food cart in the teleport square. He rushed over and grabbed something to eat. When he turned around, he had a huge hot dog stuck in his mouth. "Mum for with biff," he mumbled. It was so silly that my worries just disappeared. I mean, what's the point of stressing when your friend is eating a giant hot dog? "Sure thing," I said with a laugh. Before we even finished our weird crispy hot dogs, they didn't really taste like hot dogs at all. 1. We arrived in a small village on the north side of the 55th floor. The monsters we met along the way were no big deal. It was kind of surprising since the really tough area started on the 63rd floor. You'd think the creatures here would be super strong and scary, but they weren't. My character was at level 65, which wasn't bad. And Kirito, despite all his big talk, was actually really strong. We fought off a bunch of monsters together without getting hurt too badly. But I made one major mistake. I didn't realize this floor of the game had an ice theme. As soon as we entered the safe village area, and I relaxed, disaster struck. A huge sneeze burst out of my nose, catching me completely off guard. I stepped into this new place and couldn't believe my eyes. Everywhere else was warm and sunny like early summer. But here snow covered the ground, and huge icicles hung from the roofs. I shivered with cold as Kirito looked at me like I was crazy. "Don't you have any warmer clothes?" he asked. I shook my head, "No." But then Kirito did something amazing. He messed around with his menu and suddenly a big black leather coat appeared. He tossed it over my head, and I felt a little warmer. "Hey, aren't you cold too?" I asked him. He just grinned. "I'm fine," he said. "I've got willpower." Ugh. He was so annoying. The fur-lined coat was super cozy and I couldn't help but wrap myself up in its warmth. Suddenly I didn't feel chilly anymore, and I let out a happy sigh. "Hey, which house do you think belongs to the chief?" Kirito asked me. I glanced around the tiny village and noticed one building that stood out from the rest. It had a roof that was way taller than all the others. "Is that the one?" I pointed. Kirito nodded in agreement. "Yeah, looks like it." So we took off towards the tall roofed house. A few minutes later, we found out we were right. We met the village chief, who had an amazing long white beard, and he told us his story. Imagine sitting around a fire, listening to an epic story. But this one started from the very beginning, when the main character was just a kid. The storyteller took us on a journey through his whole life. The tough times as a child, the challenges of being a teenager, and the adventures of growing up. Just when we thought it was getting interesting, the storyteller suddenly stopped and said, "Oh, by the way, there's a dragon living on the mountain to the west." It was a pretty random thing to mention, but it got our attention. By the time he shared this cool detail, the sun had started to set outside, casting a golden glow over the village. We finally left the chief's house, feeling tired but curious about what would happen next. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the snow-covered buildings. It was an amazing sight. But my friend and I were getting a little impatient. "This is taking forever," I said. "Should we just come back tomorrow?" We looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Then my friend remembered something important. "Hey, the guy told us that the dragon is nocturnal, right? That means it's most active at night." He pointed to a mountain in the distance. I followed his gaze and saw a rugged peak with snow covering its top. It looked pretty intimidating. Aincrad's floors had some major physical limits, so the peak we were headed to couldn't be more than 100 meters tall. That meant it wouldn't be too hard to climb. One of us said, "Let's get moving. I don't want to stick around and watch you freak out." The other person shot back, Just try not to be amazed by my awesome sword skills. We both turned away, huffing in annoyance at the same time. Something weird was happening. All those silly insults we were throwing back and forth were actually getting me pumped up.
I shook my head to snap out of it.
And started trudging through the deep snow. From far away the mountain looked super steep, but when we finally got there, it wasn't as tough to climb as we thought. We made it to the top pretty easily. Looking back, it's pretty surprising that we thought the mountain would be so tough to climb. Lots of other people had already made it to the top, so it should have been a piece of cake. But when we started our adventure we still weren't sure what to expect. Luckily the worst monsters we met were Frostbone's icy skeletons, that were actually pretty easy for me to beat with my trusty mace. It was like they were made for me to crush. I swung my weapon and watched as the undead enemies crumbled to the ground with a cool clattering sound. It was super satisfying. After hiking uphill for about an hour we finally caught sight of the peak. We had just walked around a huge wall of ice when it came into view. As we looked up we saw that the ceiling of the next level was just above us. The room was filled with towering crystal pillars that rose up from beneath giant piles of snow. It was an amazing sight. As the last bits of purple light passed through the crystals, it created a stunning rainbow effect. Wow! I exclaimed, amazed by the beauty of it all. But before I could enjoy the view, Kirito grabbed me from behind, pulling on my collar. Hey! What's going on? I asked. Startled, Kirito's face was super serious. Get your teleport crystal ready, he warned. We might need it in a hurry. I nodded and quickly pulled out the crystal from my inventory, shoving it into my apron pocket for safekeeping. Kirito's expression told me that things were about to get real. I've got this from here, he said firmly. It's gonna be tough. So be prepared. Hide behind one of those huge crystals when the dragon shows up, he warned. And don't come up. I felt a surge of excitement. What's the big deal? I'm pretty strong, I can fight. But he just said no. Again his dark eyes locked on mine. For a moment we just stared at each other. Then I got it. He was trying to protect me. I took a deep breath and nodded. He flashed me a quick smile and ruffled my hair before saying, "Okay, let's go." All I could do was nod again. Suddenly everything felt different. The air seemed to vibrate with tension. I had come here with Kirito looking for adventure, but now I realized we might be in grave danger. Most of my experience points came from crafting cool gear, not fighting battles, and I'd never been in a fight where my life was on the line. But Kirito was different. He seemed ready for anything, and that made me feel a little better, and a lot more nervous. This guy had a gaze that said he lived on the edge, like his life was always on the line. I was feeling totally mixed up, so I took a deep breath and followed him to the middle of the mountaintop. As we got there I scanned the area, but no dragon was in sight. Instead, surrounded by a circle of glittering crystal pillars, was something that made my jaw drop. Whoa, it was a massive hole. Check out this massive hole. It was at least 30 feet wide. The sides were covered in super slick ice that went straight down into darkness. We couldn't see the bottom because it was too dark. Whoa, that's deep, Kirito exclaimed. He kicked a small chunk of ice over the edge, and we watched as it disappeared into the blackness. But here's the crazy part, we never heard it hit the bottom. Be careful, don't fall in, I warned him. Kirito just rolled his eyes, and said, I'm not going to fall.